Okay, I think we'll start getting underway here. So welcome uh, to the panel on cultural appropriation. And we're going to have a really vibrant discussion that touches on a lot of different aspects, from the more general to the specific, on how cultural appropriation can be viewed from multiple different lenses. And so joining us today, I'm the moderator, Adam Miyashiro. I teach at a small liberal arts college, public liberal arts college down in near Atlantic City. So I'm joining you here from Philadelphia, which used to be Lenapehoking, right? Which is still Lenapehoking. And I want to mention that, you know, whenever we talk to like Native people, Indigenous peoples, that, you know, we can also agree that, you know, Turtle Island really needs to be thought about as a settler colonial space. So I would just want to acknowledge that I'm a settler of color over here, right? And that, you know, we have to always stand in solidarity with our Native uh, um, uh, peoples, our Native neighbors, and our Native families. So today we have Dr. Kalamaoka'aina Niheu, who is going to speak from Kanaka Maoli, Native Hawaiian perspective. We have Mark Tilsen, who is an Oglala Lakota poet educator. We have Ryan Opalanietet Pierce, who is from the Nanticoke Lenni Lenape tribe. And we have Tariq Luthun, who is a Palestinian American Detroit-born community organizer. So with that, I want to turn it over to Dr. Niheu, who is actually a frontline COVID worker, a health expert who is now, I think, in San Francisco. So I want to turn it over to Dr. Niheu to talk about the first example of cultural appropriation.
Lahaina, thank you so much. I appreciate your inviting us here, Adam, and to discuss this, I think, this way in which these tendrils of colonialism go out from very, very tangible ways. Part of what I was invited up to speak on is the No Aloha Poke Company, a role that the movement had in looking at how cultural appropriation is very real and very tangible. But my history is I am, as Adam mentioned, I'm a family medicine physician. I'm currently the associate medical director of the COVID response over in the East Bay in California on US occupied Ohlone territories. I was born in the front lines of the Kanaka Maoli independence movement. As a kauka or doctor, I helped create with my family the Onipa'a Hui Kalo, which is a organization of taro farmers who work to support and revitalize traditional kalo farming and aipono, or food sovereignty, for 20 years. I also helped, I'm also one of the co-founders of the Standing Rock Medic Healers Council, as well as the Mountain Medic Healers Hui on our recent encampment and frontline struggle in Mauna Kea. I've written some works around Standing Rock violence and police militarization, as well as the importance of Indigenous resistance in an era of climate change crisis. So just to give a little bit of kind of a background of specifically in the Aloha Poke Company struggle, what happened is Aloha Poke Company around 2018 started putting out cease and desist letters for people who had companies with the word aloha and poke in their name. And I think it's really important to put into the context historically and both currently of how not only was our language illegal up till 1987 in schools, but also Hawaii in and of itself is a place that lives very much in the sexual and fantasy realm of the occupiers in the United States, that looks at not only as Hawaii as a place of their playground, but also the entire Pacific as a nuclear playground, and has treated that historically as a place where a jumping off point to then oppress other peoples. And so 50% of the world's surface for the United States military is controlled by Pacific Command. And so hand in hand with military might in aggression is the idea that every realm of our soul, our body, our nutrition, our food, our spirituality, and our land is there essentially to be consumed by our occupiers. Here in one of the most wealthy places in the United States, we have First Nations people who are not being recognized by the United States, by their occupier, yet feel very comfortable with utilizing the culture and the food and the so-called spirituality of their appropriation in order to justify why it's okay to be here. Now, part of the food and how the Aloha Poka Company wanted to increase their empire was participating in that sexualization and also kind of that ridiculousness of that idea of aloha, the kitschiness of it. When in our tradition, aloha means to recognize and present the breath of life to each other. To take that word and to utilize it for legal means to crush not only our means to take the food that we have to share and nourish each other, a healthy food that's not a part of this recent cargo culture where we had unhealthy foods like spam and unhealthy foods like just plain sugar or flour, replacing our traditional very healthy diets. And part of that violence, the only way they could take our lands and take and destroy our traditional foods was through military might. And I think one of the things that the reasons why I worked for many months, about 8 months at Standing Rock to support the Standing Rock Medic Healers Council is because I really identified with how it's really important for us to stand with peoples elsewhere, because the struggles that happen in your communities, in your homelands, ultimately come back to our homelands. The military buildup in the Middle East, when we see with Palestine, the desire for people to impose their desires upon that land and that region only could occur through military might. And they took that military might and invested millions of dollars in it so the United States could benefit from oil in the Middle East. That same military might created a huge blow up of military surplus of weapons. And what could they do with those weapons? They always had to continually build more and grow more and sell more. And they had all these weapons that they were now considered to be outdated. They created a system to then turn that weaponry into free donations over to police institutions back in the United States, especially during the 1980s and the War on Terror. And they created the model of treating our communities like a foreign enemy land, and that our people, our communities, would then become the enemy. And now we see that same replication that happened in Standing Rock. Everybody asked, where did they get this buildup? Where did they get this weaponry? Where did they get these ideas about how to impose their might upon these lands? And they realized that it happened in African American communities. Weaponry that you see happening in Asia and the Middle East came into African American communities. Then they showed up again in Standing Rock. And then you see them again now happening in Portland and every city around the nation right now in the extreme militarization of the police. So what did we see in Hawaii in particular was the alliance of Israel also in its effect and the oppression of the people in Hawaii. So here we have in Hawaii in 2017, we had, before the most recent standing at Mauna Kea, Kai Preus was one of the protectors that were at Haleakala. And what he did was he stood against the police, and a technique used and trained by Israeli soldiers, the stepping up on the neck of when they would arrest people, was trained by militarized police throughout the United States. And because of the violence that happened there, just like George Floyd, luckily he didn't die, but he now has permanent brain damage. We created the Mauna Medic Healers Hui in order to protect the protectors. So to me, when I look at the violence that happens, it starts off with stealing of a food, it starts off with stealing of a land, and then also regalia, and so poses spirituality, when really it's about their devouring of our peoples and our lands for their own personal profit and gain. So for this reason, I'm very honored to be a part of this panel, and I'm very much looking forward to hearing what everybody else has to say, to share about how cultural appropriation is really affecting and is a means of violence, extended violence and occupation in their own homelands.
Thank you so much, Dr. Niheu. I'm sure that what you're saying now is going to come back in many other people's comments, but I'm sure that we're going to pick up other things after the presentation session. So thank you very much. We'll move on to Mark Tilsen, who's an Oglala Lakota poet educator. So I turn it over to Mark.
My name is Mark Kenneth Tilsen. I'm Oglala Lakota from Porcupine, South Dakota. I'm a poet and an educator. At Standing Rock, I served as a nonviolent direct action trainer, coordinator, and police liaison, fighting the Dakota Access Pipeline. Kind of kept the fight of the pipeline going forward down in Louisiana at a place called Bayou Bridge, and been training a lot of people on nonviolent direct action, and some of the lessons that we learned from Standing Rock, facing the intense police violence, the police state, and the collaboration with the petroleum industry. I'm not really an expert on cultural appropriation, but I'm pretty experienced at being Lakota. And what we've experienced being Lakota is genocide. And we have these discussions back home a lot. One of my friends says, Mark, you can't say all roads lead to genocide. And I was like, well, considering there weren't roads before the genocide, you kind of can. And I kind of look at, has cultural appropriation a manifestation in one of the final kind of like stages of cultural genocide? I'm reminded of Sherman Alexie in one of his sardonically sad but true poems called How to Write the Great American Indian Novel. And the last lines are so on point. In the Great American Indian Novel, when it is finally written, all of the white people will be Indians and all of the Indians will be ghosts. And that's kind of what I think about cultural appropriation, rather than just the manifestation about the harm that, let's say, mascots do, or the problem of having harmful names such as like Squaw Mountain. What I see with that is a continuation of colonization that, we've discussed this before, but the erasure of indigenous reality. And then appropriation feels like a resurrection that is taken from indigenous people, from our cultures. Some of the terrible difficulties of when you're unpacking cultural appropriation, it's like strange Washichu colonized ideas about what it means to be indigenous, strange ideas of and interpretations of our practice, our understanding of ourselves. And that's what's so troubling and damning is sometimes part of being just alive right now and indigenous is we kind of learn how to be Indian through the lens, their understanding of us through colonization, because they control the dominant forms of media, of culture and narrative. And then we have to look back inside ourselves and saying where are the intentional seeds of self-destruction and colonization that were put inside of our culture intentionally? And where are these newer motifs where it's just like an exaggerated cartoon of ourselves? like, I think it's interesting to note that the Hawaiian language has been outlawed and is just recently not outlawed. For the Lakota people, our ceremonies and language was outlawed using what they call the Code of Indian Offenses, which banned all of our way of marriage, our way of celebrating victories, our way of honoring warriors, our way of creating relatives. And I bring bear with me. It's a little circuitous. Take a moment. By creating these laws which outlawed our way of practice, in 1890 there was the ghost dance, and the legalistic reality of banning all of our ceremonies, and then when the ceremonies happened, gave a green light for the military to come and crack down on this spiritual resistance movement, the Ghost Dance, which led to the assassination of Sitting Bull and the Wounded Knee Massacre. And it's cultural appropriation takes part in that heritage and lineage. Like even right now, check this out. The Wounded Knee Massacre Museum is not on the reservation. It's a tourist attraction off of I-90 in Wall, South Dakota. So like literally taking and internalizing one of the most horrific moments of Lakota history and then turning it into a roadside attraction for travelers on the interstate, which doesn't actually benefit us. Yeah, which actually doesn't benefit Lakota people. I'm not sure. I'm not, so there's kind of levels to it. Like there's of course the cultural appropriation of taking something, turning it into something else, and then there's just theft, like actual honest theft. And we, Standing Rock, we've created so many relatives, but we've also have many confused relatives. We have many confused white people post Standing Rock, which earned Lakota names or feathers up there. And I'm kind of embarrassed to say, but like my people participated in that, which empowered people to co-opt our ceremonies, co-opt our resistance movement, co-opt our ways of prayer. And I don't really know what's going to happen because it's so widespread. It was like pouring gas. It was like a theme that, runs throughout Indian countries. You see, we even have a name for them, wannabes, like people who want to be Indian, and there's a huge market. You can make an entire life out of doing ceremonies just for people who want to culturally exploit indigenous spirituality, or people who want to be exploited because they feel like there's something more for them out there. And if they only had the right connection, they'd find it. And there's money to be made by charlatans and hucksters engaging in this work on the spiritual level. And I really think that colonization and genocide, or like in the extension, cultural genocide, has a deep influence on cultural appropriation. Like there's a dominant idea that like we should at least be honored to be seen and acknowledged, as if our complete invisibility is the default instead of like well-fed human dignity. Yeah. I think that's what I have for the time being. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark. Yeah, I mean, actually, that will bring up a lot of parallels, I think, in terms of museums, right? Like museums and remembrances on, ethnically cleansed and genocided lands, even in Palestine right now, right? So with that, I want to turn it over to Ryan Opalanietet Pierce, who is a performing artist. And I'm really interested in what you have to say, so take it away, Ryan.
Oh, well, sure. Wanishi, thank you. Thank you, Adam, and thank you to all the panelists. It's a real honor to be here. Kwamkamel Mohemo, greetings. I am Ryan Opalanietet Pierce, a proud member of the Nanakok Lenni Lenape Tribal Nation and founder and artistic director of Eagle Project. It is a privilege and an honor to join with you all in solidarity this afternoon to help fight against erasure of our cultures and to battle colonial capitalism that has systemically tried to turn the world into one piggy bank for a wealthy few. Here, now, and forever, we will not stand for it. It is a pleasure to see platforms such as these that are bringing allies together to discuss and plan for a better future for our people. I've always believed, and still do, that true democracy is the answer to many of our plights. Now, my nation is among one of the longest continuous democracies on the face of this earth. Despite the centuries of genocide, this essential tradition has not been broken amongst my people. In addition, efforts at rebuilding our language and celebrating our culture are ongoing. Storytelling, music, theater, dancing, and poetry are all part of the fabric of our lives. While much of the commercial world may not know about it yet, although we might have started to change that this past Thanksgiving, from our powwows in the woods of our ancestral homelands to theaters in both Manhattan and Ramallah, Lenape's continued presence in the world is starting to reemerge, and I have my Palestinian brothers and sisters to thank for that. I am grateful to listen, participate, and learn from today's conversation on how I and my community may grow to be even better allies, and how we all can continue to assist one another in our fight for justice. Wanishi. And basically, I can also elaborate on my intro in talking about, erasure as well as the holiday that has just passed, and the links of both. Essentially, so my tribal nation, obviously we've been here for thousands of years. We got our state recognition. We won our state recognition, or earned it, back in the early 1980s, in 1982. Our culture was also illegal for hundreds of years. According to the state of New Jersey, the last Lenape left the state when the Brotherton Reservation was disbanded back in the 1820s. And so since then, according to government records, all the Lenapes were gone. Of course, due to other records and native records, we know that was not the case. There was mention of natives that did stay behind, and my ancestors and my nation are a testament to that, because we are some of those people that did in fact stay behind. That did come at a high price. As a result, it was illegal to speak our language in public. We had to misidentify ourselves to the census and other government takers for fear of being stripped of our possessions and being transported out west. As a matter of fact, there is oral testimony of elders as recently as about 100 years ago, in the 1920s, of Lenapes being found out and being transported west in railroad cars. So that was only a century ago. So it's only really since the late 1970s that we have felt safe to celebrate our traditional cultures out in the open. Our powwows became kind of reinstated in the 80s following our state recognition, and have been with us ever since. And there is, even to this day, a strong continuation to kind of resurrect our language and and in our traditional way of life. However, that was in threat earlier this century. Earlier in the past decade, basically, there was a movement by the New Jersey legislature, as well as then Governor Christie, to basically take away our state recognition. Now, federal recognition is another whole ball of wax. We've been trying to get that forever. Even some of our brothers and sister nations in the kind of Algonquin diaspora here in the northeastern part of Turtle Island, some of them have been able to get it. We haven't, in large part because of our proximity to Atlantic City. Our tribal headquarters is only about roughly an hour from what is now also known as Atlantic City. And because of those casinos, there was a lot of pressure in terms of like, oh, well, they're going to build a casino and cause a competition for that. Where we are, well, first of all, there would be no business incentive for us to do that, and then B, it's in our charter and whatnot that we want none of that. But that's not enough, obviously, for colonial capitalism. They don't even want to, they want to put themselves up against that potentially. So many casino moguls, including Donald Trump at the time, basically tried to attack basically our very existence. The kind of the famous saying that they don't look like Indians to me, and that whole kind of stereotyping existed. So one of my tribal elders and dear mentors talked about an instance during the period where our state recognition was taken away. Fortunately, through our work and new leadership, it has been reinstated. But he talked about a time where he had I believe it was a pipe that he built, and it was in a museum in also what is now known as Princeton. And it was first stated as the native Lenape pipe. When the state recognition was taken away, they had to take that Lenape or native made title out of it. So it was a pipe made from someone I don't know. And then when it was reinstated, it was able to say, okay, this is a Lenape native pipe again. Basically, according to them, that when the state recognition was taken away, if many of our artisans, both musicians and craftsmen and women, when they created a piece of artwork, if they said it was Lenape or native made, they could be fined. And so state recognition comes with not just a sense of pride and dignity, but also monetary livelihood consequences, both in the example that I just gave, also in terms of scholarships for our youth, healthcare for our elderly, and so all of that, all of that plays a role in that. So now, with the holiday that just passed, known as Thanksgiving. As a matter of fact, in the town where my parents live, they live in a town what is now known as Medford, New Jersey. There are a number of high schools in the area. One is called Lenape High School. One is called Shawnee High School. Another one is called Cherokee High School. And apparently for Thanksgiving, I know in southern New Jersey, I live in Manhattan right now, in what is now known as New York City, but a lot of my family and tribal members live in southern New Jersey. But in southern New Jersey, on the holiday of Thanksgiving, football games are a big pastime, and especially high school football teams. And so, and so knowing where this was going, I asked my father, so do these high schools play one another on Thanksgiving, right? He's like, yes, the Lenapes are playing the Shawnee today. So it's both it's tragic comedy, I guess, in some way, and because that's just an example. At least I think of the appropriation, where on one hand you always have to fight to acknowledge the tribes that are there, but yet we can put their name and other tribal names on high schools and think that's okay. Especially also when for Lenape being one of the nations of first contact, we members of my tribe we fought and defended this country in just about every war that this country has been in, going back to the Revolutionary War. As a matter of fact, it's been noted that George Washington said that for the Lenapes help in the war and also allowing them permission to cross our land for the war, the 14th state was supposed to be a Lenape state, and obviously that that did not happen. A lot of this is in a play that I wrote in response to our tribal recognition trying to be taken away. It was called "This Play is Native Made," and it was basically in direct response to some of the examples that I had. That if you said it was native made, you could be fined. And so it's kind of an odyssey of my tribal nation's history from the 1600s to the present, which does involve someone coming in to stop the play in its tracks and trying to fine me for doing and performing this play. when I started writing the play a few years ago, there was no theater in the United States that would workshop it or produce it. I basically did with my own company, Eagle Project, and along with the help of the American Indian Community House of New York City. So together we workshopped it. And then the first theater that allowed and developed the play to a full production was not in the United States, but was in Palestine, and was at the Ashtar Theater in Ramallah under the artistic direction of Iman Aoun. Right there is an example, I think, of the solidarity that is necessary between our people in terms of fighting the erasure, fighting the stereotypes, and to recognize that we are here. We have no plans to go anywhere, and we're also getting tired of trying to prove who we are, and that we have a right to be here. And also, this Macy's, the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade that just happened last week, I am proud to announce that we did give, I and some members of Lenape, Nanticoke, Lenape, as well as the Wampanoag, our brothers and sisters in the Wampanoag or Wampanoag Nation in Massachusetts, we did help deliver the first Lenape land acknowledgement on 34th Street in front of Macy's at the parade in front of 20 million people. Lenape land acknowledgement along with a Wampanoag blessing. So, I do hope that is and it wasn't on the float, it wasn't anything of that. It was just our straight message, and to our knowledge that there was no censorship of that by either Macy's or NBC. So hopefully that is a step forward of better things to come. So, Wanishi, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ryan. I live in Philadelphia. It's Lenapehoking, right? And I just want to say that a lot of my students that I teach have gone to Lenape High School, and I live on a street that's called Passyunk, which is a Lenape name for the watering hole, and all of Philadelphia is like surrounded by Lenape names, but there are like no Lenape, at least not in Philadelphia. So I wanna like especially thank you for that. On the high school end, they also do Hawaiian days, which are absolutely bonkers. They do that all over this country, dressing up in grass skirts, and it's terrible. And it is like, what, So, anyways, I wanna turn it over. Yeah,
oh, sure. No, I just have one question, because one of the things in my play we talk about the founding of Philadelphia with William Penn and Tamanend, and in my trips to through Philly, obviously you see William Penn everywhere, but I haven't seen anything to Tamanend. Are you aware of anything like that? I see Christopher Columbus, who never stepped foot in Philly, but yeah, I don't see Tamanend.
I live in the Italian area, so yeah, like they even renamed Columbus, Delaware Avenue, Columbus back in the 1960s. So
wow,
yeah, and by the way, down here in South Philly, they had to cover him up because there were people going to take him down. So,
wow.
Without further ado, I think we can talk forever about this. I want to turn it over to Tariq, who is a Detroit-born Palestinian poet. So I want to turn it over to Tariq and take it away.
Hey y'all, so can you hear me? I think it's green, so yes. First of all, thank you to Ryan, Adam, Mark, Kalamaoka'aina. Y'all have been like truly a blessing to hear. I'm gonna try to bring it a little bit closer to the Palestinian experience. I myself, like Mark, I'm not tremendously experienced with like cultural appropriation in the sense that I don't study it tremendously. I've just seen it happen a lot, and I have exhibited it in multiple spaces. I myself am a poet, I'm a community organizer, so I've experienced it both in the community organizing space as well as seen it happen in the literary space as well. Also, I'll slow down, my bad. So I think I wanted to kind of hear what everybody had to say and then kind of distill it in multiple ways, because as Adam and Ryan kind of showcased to us, you can go on a tangent with any single tendril, and I love the word that Dr. Niheu used, because like there are tendrils to all of this. And so I think I'll start off first by saying, when it comes to Palestinian, when it comes to being Palestinian, and to kind of piggyback off what Mark said earlier, When we think about genocide, people don't realize that genocide culturally is still genocide. The erasure of our cultures, the adoption, the cooptation of our cultures, is a method by which our oppressors and people who are seeking to undo us leverage to make sure that we no longer exist. One, because it allows them to wipe away the stories we're allowed to showcase with our future generations. And then two, also asserts a new rewritten history for those oppressors. So for example, think about the kafiyya or falafel or any of these different things, whether it's cuisine or these cultural markers. If you're a Palestinian and you've been wearing kafiyyas for generations, to see your oppressor wear it is on one hand, a slap in the face. Two, it is a symbol for what your oppressor can get away with. So I don't know if y'all are familiar with that almost meme-like set of words where it's like, somebody came for this person, but I did not stop them because I was not X, Y, or Z. Somebody came for this person, that is not stop them because I was not X, Y, or Z. Then somebody came for me and nobody was left to help me. And so in a way, when you think about the kafiyya, when you think about these cultural markers, we are put in a place where by rewriting history, rewriting who they belong to, you start to obfuscate who it is that you're fighting for. And I think in a lot of ways, this goes back to a Malcolm X quote, which is media will have you hating the oppressed and loving the oppressor. And so when you think about kafiyyas, when you think about these cultural markers, for a marginalized population to lose the cultural marker or to have it taken away from them, you also obfuscate who it is that you're actually supporting. That's a whole dissertation topic for another time. But I wanted to make it clear that there are a lot of things in which we're watching as Palestinians, our culture be taken from us, or at least attempted to be taken from us. Because in those desires to do so, you see a lot of capitalistic things take place too, and this is what Ryan has spoken to, which is people are selling kafiyya, people are selling falafel, people are selling, for example, I've seen Israel rebrand debka as an Israeli dance. I have seen people rebrand, Arab music being sung by Israeli artists as if Arabs never existed, right? And so there is something to be said about the ways in which a pan-Arab cultural experience is difficult to pinpoint as to who or where what cultures belong to, and we'll get into that in a second. But there is something else to be said about the difference between exchange and appropriation. So it's one thing to exchange cultural markers, to exchange cultural experiences. For example, you see a lot of cases where there's like fusion food, right? Where you might see a restaurant that does two different kinds of cuisines, but you might find that that's the case because somebody grew up in a multicultural household. Say what happens if you have, for example, an Asian father and an Arab mother. What does that mean for your cultural experience? Well, one could argue that's appropriation, but I would argue that's actually exchange, because you're growing up naturally in an experience where you can't divorce yourself with your either experience. And so similarly, when we think about pan-Arab experience or any kind of experience, to be in a space where I'm teaching you the recipe for falafel is much different than somebody saying, our people made falafel. It started with us, it ends with us, and we are erasing any historical presence of Arabs, and specifically in this case, Palestinians, who are traditionally known for that kind of cuisine. And so when you think about the ways in which these markers are being stolen, it is first and foremost a propaganda tool, right? It is a tool for these oppressors to now leverage themselves as the outputter of tremendous cultural capital. But on the second level, I kind of brushed up on this earlier, and it goes back to what Mark was talking about. It's the genocide, right? It's a way in which, as we get on and on from our generations as Palestinians, right? We have been over 7 years since the Nakba happened, of the catastrophe. You're finding that our youth have done a tremendously amazing job of staying connected to culture, as we see with indigenous populations here in Turtle Island. And also, for to shout out, Detroit is on traditionally Anishinaabe land, among other communities. That's actually why I took out Palestinian American from my bio, because I don't know if I would be an American if it wasn't for the apartheid. And well, I'm not already an American because we're on stolen land, but I don't know if I would even be in the Detroit area if it wasn't for the apartheid taking place for my people in Gaza. And so going back to the genocide aspect of it, at least from personal experience, I see a lot of cases in which it's difficult for me to find our cultural let's go with attire, right? I try to find anything that might be thobe-like or like Tetris-like for my people, but I have to go on Amazon to find some of these things, right? I have to go onto these places that are actually commodifying and are definitely not owned by Palestinians or Arabs or any of these people being marketed to me. And so what I mean by cultural genocide and how it harms our future generations, you find yourself in places where the, so to speak, gatekeepers of the culture are dying off, and therefore we're relying on a more diluted, watered down version of these gatekeepers to now uphold the peace. And so this actually goes back to what Mark was talking about a little bit, which is, what does it mean for us as a people to create items of our culture that now get commodified and easily taken away from us, or easily diluted or redistributed from us? So I don't know if you all are familiar. There are probably a lot of the cases of this that I don't even know about, but I see a lot of different Palestinian-esque designs, Palestinian-esque items being marketed and sold, and being sold as if it's, by buying it, you're supporting Palestinians. But like, really, you're supporting the one dude or the one team of capitalists who are now selling this item and mass producing this item. You're not helping, in many cases, this is not true for all cases, but in many cases, you're not helping like an auntie or a khalto back in Gaza. You're helping some young upstart here who is now commodifying their culture in a way that may not even be true to the roots of the culture. And so on one hand, you have an oppressor that is already doing it, but now you have on the second hand our own youth who are doing it because, well, if they don't do it, nobody else will. But we don't even have the ancestors or that tutelage to ensure that it's being done in a traditional, proper way, which gets back to like what Ryan was talking about as well. What a lot of us have heard so far in this panel, which is, how do you equitably and ethically ensure that our culture is being upheld by the people who get these stories passed down to them? I'm rambling at this point, but the one thing I did want to say on top of all that was, I think we can talk about appropriation all day. We can talk about all the ways in which it is being leveraged against us. Just one note I will offer in this example, or this definition of cultural appropriation is, I think it's, I'll take it back to Kafiyas. It's one thing to see a sea of Kafiyas, people wearing this marker of resistance in a protest when they're in solidarity with Palestinians, when they're in solidarity with any community. But I think there is, and I would love to hear Mark speak to this more, which is, at what point does it cross a boundary where we're being co-opted and then eventually erased, right? I'm okay with people wearing kafiyas because I love the visual of showcasing to oppressors, to people who are interested in undoing us, that there is a strong swath of people who identify with this cause. But it's one thing to wear a scarf that signifies where you stand. It's another thing entirely to begin taking that scarf and then using that as the gateway to see yourself as a more legitimate voice in the Palestinian struggle that a Palestinian may be themselves. And I think that is the fear that we have when we think about appropriation. It's one thing to exchange when you are given the green light to do so. But it's another thing entirely when you are now benefiting from the cultural marker, benefiting from the cultural experience, benefiting from somebody else's struggle for your own personal gain, or the gain of your entities, whether they be capitalist, like an organization, a corporation, a school, etc., and the people who it's being stolen from are being left for dead. And I think that is the distinction between an exchange and appropriation for those who may not know. And the last thing I'll just add, and the thing I'm curious about for us, is how do we think about ways where we can reevaluate what it means to be an exchange, what it means to be an appropriation, just to, I guess, open the door here. Like in Dearborn, I grew up in Dearborn, was born in Detroit, now I live in the suburbs. And a lot of the organizing work I do is still in Detroit. And we find there are a lot of Arab shop owners in the city of Detroit, which is the largest black city in the country. So what does it mean to be in a space where you, as the merchant class, are benefiting and reaping the funding from a community and then taking it out to the suburbs, not to be reinvested in where you exist? And so one example of a way to mitigate that appropriative act is to establish funds that redistribute a portion of the wealth back to the community. If you can't go as far as to create quotas where there is enough shop ownership in those areas to ensure that the wealth is being spent there. But again, that goes back to that's a very capitalistic model of how to exchange resources. So yeah, we can go on this all day, but I just wanted to kind of tie in the Palestinian experience, the ways in which we're being erased slowly, but how we're fighting back and trying to find ways to be equitable about not only ensuring that we don't get erased, but also ensuring that we don't accidentally co-opt our own selves, which is something we don't talk about enough. But I also don't want oppressors to run with that too. So.
Thank you so much, Tariq. We have a lot of questions and comments, and but before we get to the Q&A session, I want to kind of ask if you have questions for each other that may touch on what other people have said. So I kind of just want to see if any of you have questions for anyone before we move on to the Q&A session.
I think that Tariq asked Mark a question.
I think, yeah, I asked Mark if he wanted to speak a little bit more about the threshold by which, like, what is co-optation, right? Like, for example, with the kafia, I'm cool with people wearing kafiyas, but like but that's not the same as saying I'm cool with you engaging my spiritual traditions, right? Also, I think Ryan can speak to that, and also I'd love to just hear more from Kalamaoka'aina, because I feel like there was more stuff you wanted to say, and we have like 10 minutes. So
yeah, like specifically at Standing Rock, there was like 2 versions of a water protector tattoo, and one of them was made by a designer who was on the front lines, living in camp, like took the whoopings by the police. And it's a really simple design, and it just, all it really means is I was there and I stood. And a lot of people took this design that was meant from people kind of like who earned it, and then this one design kind of went everywhere, and like there was dozens of tattoo artists who came to camp, and then they started adding it to their portfolios, and then people would seek them out and like get a water protector tat, and it was like, did you really earn it though? And the other side of the coin is there was a different one, a water bird that was created and was made kind of like to be this moment of cultural exchange. Like the purpose of the creation wasn't to honor like the tip of the spear people, but it was made intentionally to create an open among all people who support standing for the water, our indigenous rights, fighting for Mother Earth, fuck capitalism, and fighting against the Dakota Access Pipeline. And I had very different attitudes about those 2 designs. I wanted to use one of them for my book of poems, and I even asked the other designers, it's like, do you think I've earned this? And I talked about it, and they're like, well, if you had the tat, like you earned the tat, but you're not rocking it, so maybe you don't want to put that on your book. And I respectfully said, okay, yeah, right on. And I talked to the people who I felt was most part of that core. I think again that kind of comes down to intent. Like in our Lakota spirituality, in our ceremonies, we've actually acknowledged that a lot of Lakota spiritualities survive, and we have some of our ceremonies that have been propagated out throughout American Indian country in like a pan-Indian way, and some of that's been very intentional to help and assist people, again, to the genocide who've lost their own. And there are other ceremonies that was never the intent. So I think the threshold, what I'm feeling and thinking at the moment is about intent of the creators. Was this created intentionally to create an open for other people and to be shared? Or is this something that was incredibly special and then taken? Yeah.
I wanted to add something to that with the, because you asked me to share some information as well. And that is the way that I look at stepping into spaces. And a lot of people don't actually, recognize who I am and the work that I did at Standing Rock, partially because I very intentionally did not do it for my own aggrandizement. I was there as an ally. I stepped in there intentionally being aware that I was a guest in this space and I had to honor the host. And so people don't really know the work that I've done there because that was not my purpose. My purpose was not to get famous off of this. My purpose was not to get political clout. Now I talk about it because of the very specific role that I played there. And the way that I want people to think about things and the way that I thought about it during the whole time, how do we create spaces of healing during times of war? And the answer that I've had was recognize when you are a guest and who is the host. And if you can't be clear on who the host is in those spaces, and the times when you enter these spaces as a guest, you can even bring violence stepping into those spaces as a guest, and your exit of those spaces can also be violent in itself too. So if you can recognize first that you are an occupier, you start off as an occupier, as a colonial power, and then you struggle to earn your place as an ally. I think that we're too often, the only way we can access each other's culture is through what I call the white supremacy superhighway. It's a way that we interact, that we've been taught by mainstream media, and that's what's stolen from us, is that we can't actually interact directly person to person, that we don't learn our communities, we don't step into those spaces, and we don't actually know the humanity of the people that we are fighting for. And so yeah, I'm not talking about like, social justice warrior tourism. I'm talking about providing real and deep service to these communities and doing it in a really humble way. And if we don't do that, we are part, it's almost impossible to be not a part of the violence. But if we're conscious of stepping lightly as guests, we're much less likely to hurt each other. And that doesn't guarantee that we won't, because a lot of us as allies hurt the Standing Rock community unintentionally, and a lot of allies who came to Mauna Kea, for example, have hurt our community and our peoples as well. It doesn't absolve us. Our intentions don't absolve us. Our actions do. And if we can actually honor each other's culture, I can be comfortable with saying that this is not mine.
If I may build on that, I'll share an example of I think this was in their minds a well-intentioned idea of trying to help or provide some sort of reparation, but and certainly in my opinion it backfired, and I told them that. There was an organization here in New York City. I won't give the name, but they were developing some sort of grant to for Lenapes, but the description totally was without regard to history and knowledge of the culture, because they were saying that this grant was supposed to be prioritized for Lenape of the they said 6 federally recognized nations, outside the Tri-State area in Turtle Island, and they were supposed to emphasize Black Lenape. And I was just very puzzled by all these things. Now, first, I understand in terms of the federal recognition. However, this was a New York City organization, and they totally were negating the tribal nations that are right here in Lenapehoking, like as if we don't exist, and they were playing right into that. And did they not talk to anybody about that? I know if they wouldn't have to try that hard to research and find out and contact the Lenape nations that are in fact here on the ancestral homeland. Now, look, I have no problem also wanting to give it to artisans of the federally recognized tribes of our brothers and sisters that were forced out, hundreds of years ago. But when I spoke to them, I was like, you realize there's a lot of this recognition business has more to do with politics and not culture. And by continuing to say that, you are continuing to do the colonial job of trying to determine, okay, who's native and who isn't. And in regards to the Black Lenape, to this day, I'm not quite sure what exactly they are referring to. Look, I'm all for in terms of helping our African American brothers and sisters, but Black Lenape, if you're a Lenape, you're a Lenape, regardless of what your skin tone is. As I told her, Lenape, we come in all different shades. But we're still Lenape. So what exactly are you referring to? Are you referring to a biracial person, or I have no idea. But that's. I said that's very offensive. I'm not exactly sure what you're going for there. So anyway, I think this is an example that for people that may want to be allies, once again, I mean, what exactly is it your intention? Is it to really help provide reparation and provide justice, or are we just trying to check a box to say that we did something or we try to do something and that it makes us, it may make us feel better, but we're in fact just propagating some of the ills that were done before.
Yeah, I think one thing I can add to all of that is I think, and Dr. Niheu brought it up, which is I think a lot of people play with optics, they're playing with the optics of what social justice or camaraderie or camaraderie looks like. And so you're in a place where people are trying to shortcut their way into legitimacy. And so, for example, what does it mean? So like with Marcus saying, people get the tattoo. I'm worried about the co-optation of the tattoo, because if you're getting the tattoo that's supposed to indicate that you did tremendously special work, when you leave that space, you now become an avatar for the struggle you just helped represent. And so if I get a tattoo just because I felt like getting a tattoo and I leave the space, I am now going to be seen with the tattoo and people are going to ask me for my opinion of something as if I am an expert on it. And that is where we start to see the breakdown in our cultures, the breakdown of our stories. And that is, I think, the worst thing you can have happen. And then it goes back to what Ryan was just talking about, which is you have this also very optical desire to playing the buzzwords where it's oh yeah, let's just we know Black Lives Matter, let's just throw black into something and therefore now it's legit. And it's y'all didn't talk to anybody, did you? I mean, you should definitely do things to support Black voices and Black lives, but don't just create this potluck of every marginalized community because you feel like that's the best way to do it. Target every community in the ways that they demand you want them to target them. But otherwise, you get into this place where you're just whitewashing and diluting our cultures and our histories, and then you're creating avatars of our movement just by artistic symbols and whatever. I mean, I see this all the time with spaces that I work in where there's somebody who took a picture with a pop, I've seen folks take pictures with really well-known organizers or activists, and then they get they blow up on social media, and now everybody's reaching out to them to be the experts. I'm that person doesn't know anything about the thing that you're asking them about. They just happen to be in a photo that went viral. And it's real, and I don't want to sound salty, but a lot of the real organizers doing the work aren't taking pictures about the work. They're not showcasing the work on the internet because we're also being surveilled, and it's very dangerous to be doing that. But those are things we can talk about later. I've also been really hard on young people. The other part of assimilation that's really problematic is and Mark said this earlier, a lot of folks said this earlier, which is a lot of our elders and their desire to feel welcome and belong will sometimes give culture away. Not on purpose, they don't anticipate the harm or the way it's going to be weaponized against us, but in their generosity have shared culture, and then people have taken it and not returned the favor. So there's multiple angles by which appropriation is happening and co-optation is happening, and optics play into that, social media plays into that. And so really we have to be very intentional, as Kalamaoka'aina said, about how we're entering spaces, but also if we're the host of the space, how we distribute markers and distribute what's the word for legitimacy? Yeah, legitimacy.
Thank you all for your extended discussion here. I want to move to some of the questions that we have because we only have 15 minutes left, but I'm going to kind of bunch a couple of questions together because we have questions about keffiyeh, whether wearing it to a protest is, but this is also connected to the question of dance. The very first question is about dance and debke. But obviously we all there's also the discussion around hula. There's also the question about other kinds of indigenous dances, North American indigenous dances. So is that inherently part of a whether a performance, a dance performance, or wearing symbols, is that inherently cultural appropriation, or is there, or should we be thinking about the different contexts? So I throw it up to anybody who wants to take on this question.
I guess I can answer this one, being Palestinian. This is just my personal opinion. I don't want people to be like, Tariq said I could do it, so I'm gonna start doing it. But I think there is no real blueprint. I think I'm just going to quickly try to say it. It's appropriation when you don't engage with the community, right? So if you're just going to buy a coffee on Amazon, please don't do that. But if you are getting it from like a Herbawi, for example, like one of the factories in Palestine, helping support them, if you are engaging with SJPs, if you are advocating for the community, if you actually like know folks and you're doing the work, I am personally okay with you wearing the keffiyeh, because you're showcasing to me that when you are wearing it out in the street or wearing it somewhere else, if somebody asks you what that is, I can trust you to explain why you're wearing it, who you're wearing it for, and what your intention is behind it. Because now you become an avatar for the thing that you're wearing it for. But short of that, like, you know, I've seen folks who like don't know what a keffiyeh is. They think it's just a scarf. Like, I just do that. Please get engaged with the thing you're gonna do before you do it, before you showcase it or flaunt it in a lot of ways. Please don't flaunt it just to wear it for fun. Please do the extra research to indicate that you can speak to the thing that you are now investing your public image towards.
One of the words that we have in our language is kuliana, which means both a privilege and a burden. And I think that in cultures that have a rootedness in what that means, what social signifiers mean, it's just, you just see status and you see something that looks good or elevates you. But when you hold that, you hold a privilege. It's a privilege that you have, but it's also called a burden. It means a burden. It means a responsibility. And so to hold those spaces and to have that, you know, most people just see the privilege. Do you feel the burden of what it means is basically what Tariq was saying. And, you know, if you don't, then we ask you to feel what that means, because sometimes people in our own culture don't carry some of those things, because you do have to earn it. And it does mean that you have a certain level of knowledge that, you know, is confirmed. You know, if you wear a white coat, for example, and you walk around a hospital, you know, you are being expected to be able to save a life. And people in Western world can understand what that means. But do you know what that, you know, do you know what that scarf represents? Do you know what that, you know, that pipe represents? For us, for me, I've been very blessed to be given a lot of beautiful gifts from a variety of different cultures, but I know the pain and the deep sorrow that some people have in that culture, because they don't have access to those things, because they are never taught that it was stolen from them. The language was stolen, and it was oppressed with brutality. And so when you carry that, when you wear those things, you have to understand the pain that it can cause to other people. And if you're not willing to take on that burden, and I'm not saying that, you know, it's if you want the privilege, you have to take on the burden as well. And so that's what we're asking of people, because, you know, if there's somebody that's walking around impersonating a police officer, not that I really want people to, but you know, you have to be, you know, a firefighter, for example, you know, you have to be able to respond and be able to save people from a burning building. And if you don't understand the significance of that, then why would you even try to pretend that you were, unless you were trying to exploit other people?
To piggyback off of that, the understanding of Kuilan is so vital. Even as a Lakota person, it actually helps me understand my indigenous roles even better, going to Mauna Kea and learning this teaching. And when we're talking about cultural appropriation, like one of the most common ideas we see is like headdresses at Burning Man and Coachella. And like, for me, the wiaka, like this feather I earned, is like, I risked my life. I did something truly heroic. And not only that, but my community acknowledged me and saw me. So I can tell you who gave me this feather. I can sing you the song that was given to me, and I can even recall the deed of where I earned this, versus a joke, facsimile, some kind of bizarre caricature done for the idea of freedom or fashion. And yeah.
I mean, even for example, my you know, a native name, or my name Opalanietet, you know, that's not something I just called myself. I didn't do that. a member of my tribe, and one of my elders gave it to me. You know, like that's actually a very important thing. It's not taken lightly. It's about you know, it could be something about your personality or something you do, how you make someone feel, what you give to the community. You know, it's very much a gift. Huh?
We earn our names.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And so that's, you know, that's actually a very important thing. In regards to some other appropriation, I don't feel like I can speak for everyone and everything. I can certainly, just for me personally, I don't feel like you know, wearing or something from anyone else's culture without that culture, or someone from that culture, or that community's blessing. I guess, to build off what Tariq said earlier, you know, if you have the blessing and understanding from that community, then I would do it. I just would never do that on my own. And if you do that, then you usually should be okay. I mean, like, I know there are many native artisans, and even from my own tribe, that do make crafts and jewelry and whatnot for other people, and they sell. It's a part of their livelihood. So, I mean, you know, if you talk to a member of the community or the artisan that made it, then you can get a better judgment, instead of, as Tariq said, please don't go to Amazon to buy anything. No, I shouldn't say. It's really not anything cultural. So yeah, that's my personal feeling on that.
All right, I want to, we have a really interesting question here from Malini Schuler, who is one of our organizing collective members. And she said that she teaches courses on settler colonialism and indigeneity. And students often ask what they can do to show solidarity with indigenous people in North America and Hawaii, other than simply acknowledging their settler status or signing petitions against indigenous mascot use. Given that they may not be able to travel to join activists in North Dakota, for example, what other activities can they engage to show solidarity? And this is also particularly interesting, right? As like, especially for boycott and BDS, like, how can we as non-Palestinians also engage in activity that doesn't require us to go to the Zionist state or to engage in that way? You know, what else can we do?
I believe, you know, for my Lakota people, and other indigenous folks, that the most solid way that you can help indigenous people and be in solidarity is returning land to indigenous people. And if that's individuals, that's individuals. If that's tribal communities, that's tribal communities. If that is tribal, like state recognized or else recognized tribal governments, then that's tribal governments. But literally returning the land to indigenous people is the most material way that you can move from beyond performance into actual material aid in rebuilding indigenous nations.
Go ahead.
Your personal struggle, sorry, Ryan, but make the connections, you know, figure out nobody can take on every single thing on the planet, right? It's overwhelming. It's, you know, but I think to figure out, if you're not fighting for a larger goal, whatever your struggle is, if you're not fighting for a larger goal, like, you know, one of the big things that I'm looking for is demilitarization, as well as climate change. And those go hand in hand with each other. And to me, the rise of the indigenous scientists is a really important part of that return. The idea that specific places have science and expertise and a history that is able to apply and provide that resource to help preserve and save the people that are there and the environment that it's around there. So understand what your struggle is, and if it's not going towards, you know, helping preserve the larger picture of climate change, and return back to struggles and understand how indigenous native thought and the idea of not internationally hodgepodging, and this is where the cultural appropriation is a part of it, is if you understand the depth and the roots and the power of those cultural signifiers that you have, and you would never bomb, Kalamaoka'aina. You would never have a nuclear testing, on Whangatofa. You wouldn't put the Palestinian people behind cages, because they know the answers for that land and how to take care of it for generations. So understanding, connecting our own struggles, we have to look at the larger picture. And whenever I talk about our struggles, I always unite with the First Nations people. I unite with the people of Brazil. I unite with the people of Palestine. And whatever I struggle, try to unite those things towards that larger goal. And if it doesn't have a role towards global justice for everyone, then I think that we're going to miss the boat, and we're not going to get to true justice, because it has to be, these colonial patterns are created and replicated all over the world, and we have to be a part of taking them down one by one. They don't just disappear. We have to deconstruct them just as intentionally as they constructed them.
I would say, just to build off some of what's been said, yes, certainly, obviously, in addition to native land, but I'd also say, wherever one may live, try to find out whose land you're on. Like what is the indigenous nation, native tribal nation that is in your area. Find out who it is, and because in many cases they probably are still there, and when they are still there, I would say try to contact them, and then contact them and see how you can help, because some of the differences may be different, whether it's a federal recognition or state recognition or land or cultural or monetary. Contact the tribal nation and say, hey, how can I show that I'm an ally and in solidarity with you? Because I think one thing we talked about this afternoon is, when you speak to the community itself, you'll get a better idea of what is a necessity and how you can help immediately, rather than arbitrarily thinking what someone what you think someone may need or want based on what you may hear from other media. So that's what I would say.
All right, we only have a couple of minutes, but there is a question about how sacred indigenous dances, and this is a question for Mark and Kalamaoka'aina, how those dances have been used as tourist shows. And then there's a second question about museums, and are there other institutions that can show us some kind of culture that are not museums? Museums they're stolen goods usually, right? So the dual question about performance of dances as tourist shows and museums, if anybody has anything to say on that.
Yes, this is really interesting. One of the things that's so fascinating about Lakota, like I'm kind of a nerd when it comes to Lakota stuff. Like I said in my poems, like we are infatuated with ourselves. We're the most humble people, like the proudest people you have never met. We're the only people who will tell you exactly how humble we are. We're as humble as fuck. But anyways, check this out. So when I said the Sundances were outlawed, when they came back, they forced these sacred dances to be tourist attractions for decades. They were legally only allowed to have Sundances if they did a powwow in the same sacred arbor, if they held a rodeo next door. So these Sundances, yes, yeah. So these, like one of the most sacred ceremonies was intentionally turned into this grotesque, tawdry, cheapened version itself, literally for the white gaze. And when our ways were returned to us, when we when we took them back, there's still aspects of that intense colonization. Also, depending on where you go, like different dances, like we say powwow, some of those dances are considered like special, sacred, and to preserve them to just preserve the culture, they've been incorporated into this large social commercial project called powwow. Powwow culture is its own fascinating thing. And there are dances that are, again, creating opens. There's intertribal dances that are allowing people from all different modes of abuse to come together. Excuse me, I saw the word abuse, but modes of culture to come together. And there's also like rabbit dances and courting dances where it doesn't really matter if you're native or not. If you're in the arbor, come on out and dance. But yeah, like our sacred ceremonies have definitely played a huge part of that. And sadly to say, there are some people who do sun dances for profit for white folks, and it's looked down upon. And some people have tried to stop it. It's a whole theme running throughout. Like if you talk to Orville Looking Horse, like one of our great elders, like there's definitely been a project and pushback against that, and so far has not been entirely successful.
One of the most the biggest tourist attraction that has the most revenue is actually in a place right next to where I grew up in the northeast shore of Oahu, called Laie. It's the Polynesian Cultural Center, and a really good example of like the broad exploitation of our cultures and our traditions. You have this very conservative Mormon LDS religion, which doesn't allow you to show your shoulders, that shamed us for our own showing of our bodies and our own traditions. Yet they make their native Polynesian students remove that garb and put the coconuts on their breasts, and they make them wear these clothes as students in order to get their education. And it's one of the largest capital revenue generating corporate supposed nonprofits, that all the monies go towards the Latter-day Saints Church. And they impose any thought process or any political agenda. If you're talking about saving land, traditional lands, traditional cultivation, food access and gathering, even water protection, if you oppose it, then you get excommunicated from this church. And they do not allow Native peoples to be on the highest levels of it, and they profit tremendously from it. So the violence of not participating in this means that your family doesn't get an education. It means that you can't afford to live in Hawaii. You have this in Native places all over the world, people who succeed are not even allowed to be in their own homeland. And so these spaces, this very powerful, if those of you who look at the fact that it's a religious dance that tells not only the story of our creation, but also how to care for the land in a very specific way, and very specific for each area. It's the oral stories of our research that actually provides a scaffolding for us to create sustainability within the specific regional, geographical, ecological areas. The power of that compared to these over hypersexualized dances, where they use our own bodies and our own peoples to exploit our own culture, there is a violence behind that. And so while our own people do it, and some people have drunk the Kool-Aid, it's still within the very real context of the 50% of my island, on about 40% of my island is occupied by the United States military. And, it was imposed by military law. And, if we oppose that, we were going a small nation up against the biggest army in the entire planet. So it's not separated from each other. When these tacky attacks like the Aloha Poke Company are against our people, and when they stick their lawyers upon us, that means that we also end up in jail and incarcerated.
It's just incredible how capitalism just forces everything to have a price tag on it, right? Like, no, it can't be for anything else but to make money. It has to be used for that. It can't be used for any kind of cultural thing. Everything has to have a price tag and be used for monetary gain. It's as if this country doesn't understand anything else, and maybe unfortunately they don't. I'll just talk real quick about museums. I am happy to say that my nation, I've gotten word from some tribal members that they are working they're on their own Lenape museum in southern New Jersey, and that is great that we're creating it. It's going to be our own, because sometimes the other museums, like the Smithsonian, for example, it's a mixed bag. I mean, obviously, there was a lot of fanfare when the one here in New York opened up in the mid 1990s. I remember, I was very young and getting an invitation to that. We were excited about it, but then disappointed when you go there because it's not. It's very, the word I would describe is that it seems very sterile and stale, and that it seems like, oh yes, it's like as if it's from the past, and it's not a living, breathing testament to the communities here and now. Since then, I have seen there have been attempts to make it a little bit better. No offense to some people the great people that I do know that have worked there, but they're not the owners. They're not the federal government that are making the decisions and running it. But it's a big opportunity lost, I would say. So take some of these museums with a grain of salt, unless, of course, if they are by the local, the tribal nations themselves, then that's certainly something to be supported.
Yeah, I know we have to close. I just want to say one thing. I know with museums, like a lot of times they're catered to the white gaze because curators happen to be white people in those spaces getting funded to do those things. But I want to kind of tie the last two questions together. When it comes to like how you can support BDS or any like native indigenous communities where you're not there, try to focus local, like really get engaged with where you are. Like here in Detroit, like the best thing I can do isn't helping. And like if I could help as the people I can because I have family there, but things sometimes take 8 months to get to Palestine. So the best thing I can do is to be really well versed in the native peoples here, the indigenous peoples here, any other marginalized communities here in the Detroit area. 2, invest as much as I can in those communities. And 3, just try to divest from anything that harms them. So obviously we can't get away from everything, but if I can choose between, going to like a sports venture that's owned by a very capitalist company, whether it's Quicken or whatever, or trying to like work with somebody local in some other capacity, always try to go local. So I guess the best thing I could say is keep trying. So even if it feels like really hard in capitalism to divest from things, just keep trying to. I know you can't sometimes get shoes that aren't Nike shoes or whatever, but try as best you can. Keep educating folks on the fact that it is a thing that they should be working against. So for example, you may not be able to divest from a Nike shoe, but maybe the person you tell can. And then lastly, just keep organizing locally. The best thing we can do is at least, if you create a situation where your metropolitan area now becomes like a hub for divestment, you have now taken one city off the map that an entire oppressive industry relies on. So start local.
All right, I want to thank everyone on this panel. This was awesome. We ran over. I was not doing my good job as moderator, but I want to remind everybody who's still listening that right now in about 8 minutes, 7 minutes, there's the Odyssey of Hope film screening by the filmmaker Ahmad Mansour. So that's in Haifa Hall. So I hope you all join us over there. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for everyone coming here. All right, lovely panel. Thanks all.